I have a question for you. Who is the second most powerful person in the US after the president? Well, that would of course be the governor of the Federal Reserve. Yep, that's right. Turns out that whoever controls the money printer has a hell of a lot of heft. Therefore, knowing how Jerome Powell will act in certain circumstances is vital information. This is why it's so important for us to ascertain how he views cryptocurrencies and what they have in store for us over at the Fed. So in my video today, I'll be doing exactly that. I'll be taking a look at Jay Powell's previous record on crypto and his current thinking, all to help you determine which way the wind blows for your portfolio. Before we proceed, some legalese, if you please. Anyone providing financial advice without holding the requisite license is in breach of the provisions laid out in the Financial Services and Market Act of 2000. Those in breach could be subject to sanction and monetary penalties. I must therefore categorically state for the record to the court that I hold no such license and as such am not approved to offer financial advice. This is purely educational content. Now, if you're wondering what the hell just happened, well, you must be new here. I am Guy, your crypto guy, and my main goal is to bring you the highest quality crypto content on the tube, all without getting sued. So, if you want to join me on that educational mission, I suggest you hit that subscribe button and ping that bell. That way, you'll get a notification the moment I release another video. One more thing, if I may, please direct your gaze to the timeline below. I've broken up the video into various sections which will allow you to skip around at your leisure. Although, as an unqualified legal advisor, I would suggest you watch the whole way through. Alrighty, court is in session. Let's proceed in the case of the Fed versus crypto. I want to start off with a bit of an overview of why what the Fed says, or thinks, is so damn important. This is because the Federal Reserve is literally in charge of the money in the country. The Fed is tasked with shaping monetary policy, which impacts the amount of liquidity in the system. It's this monetary policy that affects everything from interest rates to growth, employment, and inflation. What the Fed does with monetary policy can effectively determine which direction the economy goes. It's a lot of power that's in the hands of a very small group of people. Not only that, but the Federal Reserve, and most central banks for that matter, are independent, unelected entities. Unlike the case for the president, which determines fiscal policy, the Fed is apolitical. They're appointed by the president, and they are supposed to make policy that cannot be influenced by any sort of political decision. This also means that they can make that policy and take decisions that cannot really be overruled by Congress or other political bodies. Think about how long it sometimes takes to get a fiscal spending package through. For example, last year when Trump was trying to get additional stimulus checks sent out. Given the hyper-partisan politics that we're living through, that package never managed to get passed. But even in times when we don't have such polarizing politics, elected officials usually have to go through numerous stages, voting and consensus to get a spending package through. This is true for most countries and not just the US. However, when it comes to the Fed, they can operate independently. It's like that by design. There are Fed board governors who meet regularly to discuss monetary policy. These governors are selected by the president and confirmed by the Senate for 14-year terms. These 7 members have a heck of a lot of power in their hands, and at the top of the heap, you have Jay Powell. So much emphasis is placed on what is said by those in control at the Fed that ex-chairman Alan Greenspan invented his own quasi-language called Fed speak. This was his tactic of making vague, ambiguous, and often wordy statements in order to make sure that the market did not overreact to his remarks. Other chairs have used their own tactics in the past in order to keep their intentions under wraps. Methods deployed in order not to give the game away to market participants. That's not stopping people from trying, though. Seriously, right now there are hedge funds that are studying Jerome Powell's facial expressions in order to try and judge which way rates are going. Crazy, right? Anyways, the point is that the Fed has a lot of power and can make really important decisions based on anything money-related, including cryptocurrencies. This is why it's so damn important to know exactly what they think and why. So, let's start at the beginning, shall we? For those of you who don't know, Jerome Powell is the first non-economist to serve as Fed chairman in over 40 years. To quote his own testimony when being appointed to the Fed board in 2012, he is a, quote, lawyer, an investment banker, and an investor. Interesting. Anyways, this is in stark contrast to the person who he succeeded. I am, of course, talking about Janet Yellen, who was an academic economist with a PhD. She's also the current Treasury Secretary and someone who we'll come back to later on in this video. As we know, Jerome was elected as Fed chair back in 2017 during Trump's first year in office. In the months leading up to him officially taking over the reins, we got some indications as to his view on cryptocurrencies. Firstly, during a speech he gave in June of 2017 at the Economic Club of New York, Powell said that he had, quote, nothing against Bitcoin, nothing against, private currencies. So that would have been seen as a tacit acceptance of Bitcoin's current stance in the financial markets. However, it was what he said after that which was quite illuminating. He said that, quote, I think from a Fed standpoint, I would say I'm very cautious of the idea of a Fed digital currency. In other words, back in 2017, Jerome said on the record that he was quite skeptical of CBDCs. Now, it turns out that this skeptical stance towards CBDCs was a view he had actually shared before when giving a speech at Yale Law School event on blockchain and the future of finance. Here, he further explained the challenges that he sees for CBDCs, including technical difficulties and privacy issues. He also said that it may, quote, stifle innovation in the long run when it comes to improvements in other payment technologies. It's pretty interesting to hear his views about CBDCs back then, especially in light of how he views them today. But we'll get on to that a bit later, so stay tuned. Anywho, back in February of 2018, Jay Powell was officially sworn in as the new chair of the Federal Reserve, and his stance towards cryptocurrencies seemed to change quite drastically. During a session of Congress back in July of 2018, Jerome decided to unleash on cryptocurrencies. He claimed that most of those who were buying cryptocurrencies were doing so in expectation of an increase in price. Moreover, he had consumer and investor concerns around cryptocurrencies in general. He stated that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin also had no intrinsic value. The typical no-coiner MO. However, he did seem to have a more positive view about blockchain technology more broadly. He said that it could have significant applications in the wholesale payments part of the economy. Now, this is interesting because it shows that there was a change of tune as it related to cryptocurrency. Those that were volatile and bought in the hopes of profit were considered too risky. However, those that further built on payments infrastructure with blockchain technology were viewed more favorably. All quite Fed speak of JP there. However, that Fed speak tone got a lot more assertive and clear in 2019, and it was all spurred by a new cryptocurrency. I am, of course, talking about Libra, Facebook's attempt to make a global payment system which would empower users, bank the unbanked, and preserve their privacy. That last one was a joke, by the way. But yes, Libra was Facebook's stablecoin that was going to be a collaboration with a number of other companies in the Libra Association. This stablecoin was to be backed by a basket of currencies and US treasuries. So basically a centralized currency issued by a single entity with nobody to really hold it to account. Sounds eerily familiar. Now, of course, one centralized money issuer cannot have another one rivaling it. So we can then understand the strong reaction that the Fed had to Libra. Powell said, quote, Libra raises serious concerns regarding privacy, money laundering, consumer protection, financial stability. He also said that it could not go forward unless Facebook addressed a number of concerns that regulators had about the project. Less than a month after the announcement of the project, the Fed had Facebook executives over to further discuss Libra. Now, to be fair, it wasn't just the Fed that had concerns with Libra. Many other levels of government felt the same. The Facebook executives in charge of the project were hauled in front of Congress and grilled for hours on end. It's also probably most likely that the extreme blowback the project was getting was mainly because of who was backing it. There's no denying that Facebook is perhaps one of the most disliked companies on Capitol Hill at the moment. Oh, I should also point out that Bitcoin did not escape comment by Powell at the Libra hearings either. He actually made the argument for Bitcoin insofar that it's a, quote, alternative to gold. Now that's interesting as well, as it's a slightly more dovish tone than he had taken in the past. Gold is a universally accepted asset class that was actually held by the Fed in the past as a means to back its fiat currency. Of course, it's way better today, where fiat money is backed by magic. Anywho, this admission that Bitcoin was seen as an investment comparable to gold did not go unnoticed. Here is Barry Silbert of DCG tweeting about it, for example. So it was pretty clear that the Fed was not a fan of Libra. However, unlike most other people who opposed it because of Facebook, I think the Fed was opposing it for different reasons. As 2020 rolled around, the world was in a relatively stable state. The stock market was near all-time highs, economic growth was strong, and the Fed was no doubt enjoying the relative calm. The Fed was even happy to discuss China's e-yuan CBDC in Congress in February and how it had very little privacy. At least we can agree on that. Of course, the e-yuan became the least of our concerns once 2020 got into its stride. COVID was spreading rapidly around the world, and it was causing immense damage to global economies. Powell put on his firefighter's hat and got to work flooding the system with money. And I mean that literally, by the way.
Fair to say you simply flooded the system with money?
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
Anyways, you would have thought that in this environment, the Fed would not have the time to start researching CBDCs and blockchain. Well, that is exactly what they did. In August of last year, the Fed published this paper entitled Comparing Means of Payment: What Role for a Central Bank Digital Currency? It was a really interesting paper that went into quite a lot of detail about the potential of CBDCs. They talked about how it could easily fit into traditional payment systems and that it has, quote, the potential to be an improvement over both existing modes of payment. I've linked to it below, and I encourage you folks to read it when the time allows. What's also interesting is that this report was released on the same day that one of the board governors, Lael Brainerd, was giving a speech on digital currencies. She confirmed in that speech that the Fed was actively involved in conducting research and experimentation related to distributed ledger technology. The speech also highlighted some of the reasons as to why the Fed was all of a sudden so interested in digital dollars. These included the rise of Bitcoin, as well as private stablecoins such as Libra. And, of course, China's move to a CBDC also underscored the urgency of the implementation. In that same speech, she also revealed that the Fed was collaborating with researchers at MIT on their digital currency initiative. So, in the midst of one of the most severe economic episodes in Fed history, they were involved in some pretty in-depth research with scientists at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Then, about a month after that, Powell was invited to a panel discussion on cross-border payments held by the fine folks over at the IMF, the same IMF that took major issue with El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender. Anywho, one of the major points of discussion was, of course, CBDCs. When it was Jerome Powell's turn to talk, he stated, quote, there are a number of ways a CBDC might improve the payment system, and it's this area that motivates our interest. He also confirmed that the Fed is working with MIT to bring about that hypothetical digital currency that the Fed could possibly use. Now, something else that I found quite interesting that he mentioned is the fact that over 80% of the world's central banks are exploring their own versions of CBDCs. This is actually something that I talked about in greater detail in my recent video on CBDCs, and you can watch that in the top right, by the way. So that was the lay of the land last year. And if you think the Fed was being a lot more outspoken then, what we've seen this year should leave no doubt in your mind. Firstly, in February of this year, Jerome was back in Congress. This was his first time speaking to the newly elected Congress after Biden had been inaugurated. In this session, he further reiterated that the digital dollar is a high-priority project for the Fed and they are looking carefully at it. He said, quote, this is something we're investing time and labor in across the Federal Reserve System. Then, a few months after that, he was invited to speak at a virtual summit hosted by the Bank of International Settlements. For those that don't know, the BIS is literally the bank of central banks, and they themselves also have a specific view on cryptocurrencies. I've covered that in broader detail as well, which you can watch by hitting this link right here. Anyways, at that summit, Jerome decided to opine on the crypto markets once again. This time, he was throwing out cautionary warnings around the risks of Bitcoin and how volatile it is. However, in the summit, he also commented on Bitcoin's benefits as a substitute for gold. Yes, most people don't really use it in order to make their daily payments, but they do see it as a method of preserving wealth. Yes, it's incredibly volatile in the short term, but its longer-term staying power determines the benefits of a store of value, hence the comparison to gold. Then, about a month after that round table, he was back on CBS 60 Minutes, where they talked about a whole host of issues. One of those that came up was, of course, the topic of China's e-yuan and whether the US was any further along with its plans on the digital dollar. Powell further confirmed that they were actively evaluating digital dollars and were trying to understand all of the implications. He also dismissed the fact that the rise of other cryptocurrencies was the motivating factor for them making the move. He said, quote, "There are private sector currencies, stablecoins, and cryptocurrencies as well. Those are not at a level or a scale that's concerning at this point." I somehow don't buy that narrative, though. That's because a little over a month after that 60 Minutes interview, Jerome Powell released a video that almost exclusively discussed cryptocurrencies and digital payments. He decided to take aim at cryptocurrencies more broadly and once again threw FUD at their value as a currency. The fact that they could not be used as payments and that their value fluctuated too wildly. However, Jerome then pivoted to talk about the benefits of stablecoins, that they could be used as a method to make payments and that they did not have fluctuations in value. So, all good, right? The Fed is okay with stablecoins as they meet its specific requirements. Well, not so fast. You see, he also thinks that these have risks in that they do not have the same protections that you have with physical cryptocurrency and funds in your bank account. Well, I will personally counter that fiat that's held in a bank account is not safe at all, and you can find out why by watching my video on the greatest Ponzi scheme of all time. It's linked to in the top right, so you can come back and watch it later, should you so wish. After that FUD-flinging, Powell also raised the spectre of further regulations targeted at these stablecoin issuers. But not all stablecoins, just those that were issued by private companies. That's because he then also started talking about the technological advances that are being made on CBDCs. This includes the work that the Fed is doing itself in collaboration with the MIT researchers. So what came to light in this video is not only that the Fed is pushing forward with these CBDCs, but also that they're going to start actively clamping down on stablecoins. And if that's not evidence enough, we have another speech that was delivered by Lael Brainerd where she slams stablecoins. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because she is the Fed governor tasked with working on the CBDC. Yep, that's the one. She was pretty forceful in her language and cautioned about network externalities, fraud, consumer protection, and inefficiencies. The vast majority of the speech, however, was centered around the potential of, yep, you guessed it, CBDCs. So that then perfectly tees up everything that's been happening this year. And it was in July when things got really heated. A little over 2 weeks ago, Powell was in a congressional session where the topic of conversation got back onto open source cryptocurrencies and CBDCs. More specifically, he was asked whether having a digital currency that was issued by the Fed would be a more viable alternative than having multiple cryptocurrencies or stablecoins emerge in the payment system. He agreed and said, quote, "You wouldn't need stablecoins, you wouldn't need cryptocurrencies if you had a digital US currency. I think that's one of the stronger arguments in its favor." So, Jay Powell officially came out and said that he thinks a Fed-issued digital dollar will negate the need for any other types of cryptocurrencies. That regulations may be needed on stablecoins because they don't have the same benefits of any potential CBDC. Interesting. Quite the change of tone that the Fed had towards private cryptocurrencies less than a year ago. Then, about a week after these statements from Powell on crypto, we had news of a very important meeting between all US regulators. It was held at the request of Janet Yellen, Powell's predecessor, in her capacity as the Treasury Secretary. It was also attended by Powell from the Fed, Rustin Bayman from the CFTC, and Gary Gensler from the SEC. Oh, and quite coincidentally, the same Gary Gensler who lectured at MIT on blockchain technology. What emerged from the meeting was that a clear and decisive action was needed on stablecoin rules. The working group also said that they, quote, expect to issue recommendations in the coming months. It will be really interesting to see what these recommendations are. Some people are claiming that they could target stablecoins like Tether, and this is perhaps the reason why Tether is trying to preempt this by stating that they will be doing a full audit. However, it's more than likely that there will be a raft of proposals which will probably make it a lot more burdensome to use stablecoins in general. I should also note that these proposals for stablecoin regulations could also come at about the same time that we're likely to get that report from MIT on the viability of a CBDC. How's that for timing? I'm going to start wrapping this video up with a few final thoughts. While the Fed was not too focused on cryptocurrencies when Jerome Powell started his tenure, it's pretty clear that things have changed. He went from being relatively unperturbed by their rise to suddenly worried about the risks that they posed. Didn't matter whether it was Bitcoin or stablecoins. If it was not Fed issued, it was not safe. Now, whether this change of heart and shift to CBDCs was because of the growth of these assets or because of what China was doing, it's hard to tell. What is clear, though, is that there is now a concerted effort to ease the public to the idea of a centrally issued digital dollar. Not only have we seen this with their research on the matter, but also by the public statements by the chairman and those who work with him. It also seems to be coming at a time when the other regulators are jumping on the regulation bandwagon. Whether what the Fed is working on in the CBDC realm is at all related to what's going on with regulations at the Treasury or SEC is hard to tell. However, their recent joint meeting on stablecoin regulations does raise a few eyebrows. It's an interesting time in the crypto sector. On the one hand, CBDC technology will revolutionize the payment landscape and will undoubtedly make it easier and more efficient. On the other hand, when used for nefarious purposes, they can restrict privacy and prosecute those who use it for means that the issuer is not happy with. If the Fed is hell-bent on issuing a digital dollar, then I, for one, am okay with that, as long as they allow it to be issued in a fair manner alongside the entire landscape of cryptocurrencies. However, when they start instituting these draconian laws that only target the cryptocurrencies we use, that's when I have a problem. And that brings to a close our video for today. I'm keen to hear from you guys, though. What do you think the Fed is planning? Chances of us seeing a CBDC soon? Fire your comments into the comments section below. Oh yes, while you're down there, there's something you cannot afford to miss. It's my socials page. It's over here where I have links to all of the other places that you can follow me off the tube. These include my Telegram channel with my daily market analysis, my Twitter with news and channel updates, my Instagram with some behind-the-scenes action, my TikTok with my video pipeline and general banter, and finally my email newsletter. My once-weekly view on everything from the hottest coins to exciting trends. I also share a breakdown of my personal portfolio here, and it comes with a 100% spam-free guarantee. The only official links to those are in my dedicated socials page, and you can find that link to in the tippy top of that description box. And finally, if you guys found this video insightful, then help YouTube help me help you. Turn that like button blue and don't forget to subscribe. Ping that bell as well for good measure. I have an exciting pipeline of videos that you guys cannot afford to miss. Time to say bye, as this crypto guy has gotta fly.